coming up next in North Carolina is Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you are live on Transatlantic.
Hi, how can we help you?
Hi, ladies. Great to be calling in. This is my first time calling into the show. I'm trying to catch my breath after that last bit. I want to start off by saying I agree that being a furry and being trans are two different things, and that just because you use a different hand to write with, it does not make you a dog.
Yeah.
Right.
Glad we're in agreement.
Awesome. So what's your question?
Having started off on that foot, I wanted to ask about what I see. I guess that's maybe the first place to start is, y'all see this as well, the increased prevalence of what nowadays people call NB or non-binary versus like when I transitioned years ago, we were calling it genderqueer, and it was actually pretty rare to see somebody who identified that way or used they, them pronouns. At the time, people were even sort of debating, like, what are the pronouns that are going to be used? And, of course, people still will use other pronouns, or sometimes I've seen no pronouns at all. But they, them has seemed to taken kind of a foothold, and as well as the non-binary identity to such an extent that I feel like when I go into trans spaces, whereas it used to be like an extremely rare thing, I feel like I see more people who either identify as NB or using they, them pronouns more so than people who still identify in a binary way with our gender. And so it leaves me wondering, what is the future of that? And I guess I'm just kind of curious what you all see as, you know, being in that position as influencers. Where do you see this going, and how does that affect those of us who identify still in what almost seems like, when you're in trans spaces, like in kind of an old-fashioned way, as just, you know, I'm a woman, I just happen to be transsexual.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's definitely an interesting thing. And you know, I think what makes it even more interesting is when you get into the differences between, like, there are non-binary people who don't personally identify as trans. Like my sibling, for example, last I heard, they may have changed their mind. I have no idea. They go by they, them pronouns. They have undergone several, like, gender affirming medical steps, and they still don't consider themselves trans. So I think it's kind of like the way that like our culture is moving as we kind of slowly take steps towards, like, the abolition of gender is definitely interesting. And I think I hear what you mean, because I remember when I was first engaging with my transness, like a decade ago, it was very similar to what you were describing, where pretty much everyone was a trans man or a trans woman. They were binary, and it was like you didn't see non-binary people as often. That being said, I don't think that makes it like a trend or anything like that. I want to be super clear that is absolutely not what I'm saying. But I definitely understand how the shifts in the composition of the trans community can feel like jarring to someone who's been in the community for a long time, and can kind of feel like, oh, is there something going on here that is like worthy of concern or something, or that maybe needs to be talked about more deeply. And I definitely think worthy of, like, having more conversations is, like, always a good thing. I'm totally down for more conversations on it. But yeah, I think, I don't know, like, so Call Screener, which I'm sure you guys know, Matt, we were having a discussion about this the other day about, like, you know, whether or not transness is, like, an innate thing, or whether it's something that, like, is kind of, like, established at some point in your life, and, like, how do you know the difference, and does it even matter? And kind of the thing we came to is that, like, at the end of the day, I don't think it really matters, you know, like, at the end of the day, all I want is for people to feel good in their skin. And with the information that we do have, the empirical data that we do have, is that transition care is effective, highly efficacious, like insanely over the top, works well, like almost every time. And really, I don't feel like you can ask for better than that, you know, like, I get it's concerning, and there's a whole cultural shift going on, and that can be, like, uncomfortable in some senses, but at the end of the day, if people are feeling more comfortable in their skin and it's not impacting trans healthcare in like in a negative way, then like I don't know, just kind of an adjustment, you know?
Yeah, I think when I analyze when I analyze things like this, I try and look at it from the two like perspectives, and I've kind of come in with this when talking about like labels and things before. When you're looking at groups of people, there's two reasons why you might want to have an opinion on them or label them or group them or understand them, whatever. And one is because it's useful to describe things and you want to communicate things. And in that sense, does trans people being non-binary affect me? Not at all. Doesn't affect me at all. If I was the only woman on Earth and every other single person alive was a non-binary person, cool, whatever. That's just in the sense of just describing people. That's how they describe themselves. This is how I describe myself. Makes the most sense. Doesn't matter. And then the other thing, which I think is often much more important, is like looking at forms of prejudice. Actually, I think Arden did touch on perhaps the third thing, which is medical treatment. Perhaps I'll come to that later. But like importantly, I think looking at like prejudice various groups face and the difficulties they face that prevent them from having like a normal, happy, healthy, safe life. And when it comes to trans people and non-binary people, there's definitely a special type of prejudice against non-binary people. And I think we can see it in the form of them saying that, all non-binary people is a trend or whatever. You do see that said about trans people. And like all of this prejudice, it's just recycled again and again. And there are people who aren't comfortable with any LGBT people, and they say a load of garbage. And then you get people who are just comfortable with cis, gay, and lesbian people, and they say all the exact same garbage against bisexual people, trans people, non-binary people, everyone else. And then you get people and they accept bisexual people and they accept like binary trans people because to them, it makes sense. If a man wants to be a woman wants to be a man, that's it. I'm happy with that. And then as soon as you bring up non-binary, they say all the same prejudice garbage again. And that's not to say that it's just a simple hierarchy like gay people have it, cis gay people have it easiest, and then binary trans people, and then non-binary people. It's a complex web, and there's all kinds of things going on. But I do think that there is special prejudices against non-binary people, and I think part of that is the patriarchies. Men do this, women do this. There are two very strict boxes, and you're either in one box or you're in the other box, and you must act, behave, look, fit in with these boxes. And any kind of, throughout history, any kind of attempt to break out of these boxes, not just in terms of being a trans person, but women stay at home in the kitchen. Actually, women shouldn't just stay at home in the kitchen. They should do what they want, which if they want to be staying at home in the kitchen, maybe that's fine. But this was breaking down some of the the patriarchal boxes that, society has created. And binary trans people do that, but in a way you can just move from one box to the other. And if people accept that, you're not changing the system, really. You're changing the rule that what box you were born in is the box you die in. But that's just one little rule change. The boxes are still there. But with non-binary people, they're kind of saying, they're even more explicitly saying these boxes are rubbish than any other group visibly, I think. And certainly sometimes you will see people who, might look non-binary. I know that's quite a difficult thing to describe and characterize, but just them being like that threatens people who really need these boxes for whatever reason. They base their whole life around these two strict boxes existing, and suddenly here's a person who doesn't fit in them, makes them angry, and they react with irrational prejudice. So why we're seeing more non-binary people, a lot of it's going to be visibility, and a lot of it's going to be society becoming more accepting of the idea of getting rid of these two boxes. So when I consider these things, like they're the two things I take into account. Does it really affect me? No, I've thought about it a little bit. Like, oh, I didn't actually know that non-binary was an option when, at an early stage in my transition. I was like, could I be non-binary? I'm just no. It doesn't. It's not a thing that, it's not a thing I am, basically, and I don't really think I need to think about it very hard. And then does it? Is there some irrational prejudice here that I need to be aware of, make sure that I'm not engaging in, and to help them be liberated from? And the answer is yes. So I'm interested in that regard. Then just lastly, just before I see what you have to say about that, one thing Arden mentioned was about healthcare and like non-binary healthcare. And part of like traditionally, the rules for trans people were so strict. I mean, they used to only offer transitionist healthcare to people who they thought would pass, and so that they wouldn't be breaking up cis society and scaring people and getting rid of the boxes and all this kind of stuff. They used to insist on binary transition, as in, if you start this at all, you're going all the way and you're going to have the surgeries that we dictate to you and stuff. And I know trans people who transitioned in that time and were forced to have surgeries against their will to have any kind of treatment or even, to live at all. And as those rules get taken away because it's barbaric, I think we'll find that some trans people who did transition the binary, the enforced, like, this is how you must transition, will realize that that isn't necessarily where they're most comfortable. But then we might see this kind of thing come back where people don't like non-binary people and they don't want you having just this surgery or just these hormones or whatever. And that could affect healthcare for other trans people. I know that some binary trans people feel like, well, there is a special prejudice against non-binary people and we're all getting conflated together. So maybe if I'm horrible to non-binary people too, they'll see that we're different, and then the prejudice I'm experiencing will get less. And that's, I think, rubbish. I actually did a video about that on my channel if anyone wants to check it out, called I'm One of the Good Ones. I think that when you contribute to the prejudice against the group you're part of, then you just make life worse for yourself. Maybe you get a little short-term respite, but it's going to be worse for you in the long run. So I do understand that, some binary trans people they're not just like, I don't understand non-binary, and they're not just like, I don't really care about the irrational prejudice against non-binary people. They're also like, I feel like I need to be hostile towards non-binary people because I feel like the transphobia at maybe even the majority of today's transphobia is about non-binary people. I mean, maybe that's how they feel. I don't know if that's true or not. And that can cause them to be like transphobic themselves. And I mean, we definitely see that with all like the true trans people and stuff. But yeah, anyway, I've said a lot of things. How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I relate to a lot of the things you say. Certainly, I don't want to see somebody else have to experience, any part of what we've experienced in terms of, like you were saying, the prejudice and the struggles to go through that. And I struggle with how best to support people who are in that position when I feel like, as many times as I've been to, non-binary 101 courses, or I've known people both socially and in terms of going to support groups and that sort of thing, or just hearing them talk through whatever their media channel is. But part of it is I don't know that everybody who identifies as non-binary or who uses they, them, and you touched on this, is experiencing something that is necessarily all in the same box, if you will, even though that's obviously where they're all going to get lumped. And so when I'm with other binary people, particularly who are maybe cisgender, and they're like, what is with this they, them, make up your mind, or something along those lines, how to respond is something I really have to just kind of like take in the moment and do the best that I can, because I don't necessarily know what the way to do that is. And while I identify as I've never identified as non-binary myself, I do relate to something you were talking about the way treatment has changed over time, whereas there was originally one idea that came down from cis society and cis medicine that said this is the correct way to transition, and you either do it this way or there really is something wrong with you, and it's kind of like we're going to throw you back to the people who don't even think you exist. There's that sort of implied threat, if you will. And now, if there are more options, then I wonder if in some sense, in the same way somebody can transition without having to transition in the way people used to think you had to, what other possibilities open up when society starts to embrace people who are non-binary, particularly as someone who transitioned from being raised in the other gender, or what used to be the other gender. Now I guess it's just an other gender. There's traits that are there's certain traits that are more based on what is going on with the neurobiology, in terms of like y'all probably relate to this, but it's like I gotta have my hormones. Okay, that's just got to happen. My brain is going to do whatever it has to do in order to get them. But on the other hand, there's things that, and sometimes it's hard to talk about this because we're afraid to, I think, admit this sort of thing in front of cis society. But there are things that is less about the shape of your brain, and it's more about what did you learn when you were really young. And so I do find that, and I think it has something to do with having been assigned male at birth instead of female, is that I have a little bit more of a go-getter attitude, if you will, than a lot of women who are cisgender. And they talk about always feeling like they have to hold themselves back, always feeling like they're not really capable of something. And I see in myself that I am more willing to take that risk. And even if it didn't have to do with being assigned male at birth, I think in general people who are trans, whether we were assigned male or female at birth, just the fact that we've gone through that gender transition and we've had to say, you know what, I'm going to do what I have to do regardless of the consequences. I think both of us, men who are trans as well as women who are trans, we come out of that experience typically with an attitude that is, you know what, I'm going to go for it because I made it through that. So this can't really do that worse.
Nothing's hard when you've transitioned.
Yeah, it definitely fosters a very powerful sense of resiliency. I definitely get what you, I think in terms of like how you respond to your family or friends or whoever who may not understand non-binary people. I think like, I don't know, I struggle because, not being non-binary, I feel like I may probably fail to convey the experience accurately. But one thing that I find is effective, just kind of communicating that like, okay, it might make you uncomfortable, but does the fact that you're uncomfortable, should that in any way, shape, or form impact how this person lives their life? No, obviously not. Like that should be transparently clear to just about anyone, especially if they can accept a binary trans person. I have a hard time believing that they're going to have so many hangups that they can't put those pieces together to be like, okay, well, I may be uncomfortable with this. I may not understand it. I may not be used to referring to people in this way, but that does not mean that that should impact how they live their life or what resources they have to, come into themselves. And again, when we see the data on transition being so like, clearly like transition is effective, it really gets to the point where like any pushback against that, like whether it's legislative or whether it's like in the media, is quite clearly just like a different evolution of like anti-queer bias, like I think it's kind of like how anti-transness is like homophobia, but like also more. I feel like NB phobia seems like anti-transness, but more, it's just, these things just kind of build off each other. Like we were talking earlier about analogizing different forms of phobias. With that, I'd love to hear more, Elizabeth. This call has been going on a while, but it's been really interesting. I don't want to say goodbye because I feel like this is a really interesting topic, but we do have other callers on the line. So perhaps you can call back.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for taking my call and giving me the chance to talk. And as problematic as it is, I just have to say that you both are so very pretty. And have a great show.
Oh.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting topic. I think a lot of people are jonesing to talk about, like, you know, if they like they don't want to be invalidating of like, sorry, is that did I?
No, it's just a funny term. It makes me laugh.
Oh yeah. I think a lot of people don't want to like hurt the feelings of like people they know who are non-binary, but they might have some sort of cognitive dissonance about not understanding it and accepting the person and being like, how do I hold these two things at the same time? And it's like, I definitely think it can be done, but
I don't get non-binary people, and when people ask me, that's kind of what I say. But like, I don't get trans men, I don't get cis men. Like,
true.
Why? I don't know, but they just do, and that's cool. And it obviously is comparable to my experience. So when someone says to me like, "Oh, what's all this non-binary stuff about?" I'm like, "Well, you know how like you're a woman and like I'm a woman and that's cool and that's what we want to be, and some people would rather be men, but some people would rather be non-binary, so like that's cool, isn't it?" I mean, it's just as confusing to me as someone who like, imagine being born a boy and just being chill with being a man. Like, what kind of weird people are, like, they're the weirdest people alive. So
what kind of monster are you?
If you can accept cis men as a concept, then you can get over non-binary people. Like,
Drew. Oh my God.
No offense, trans guys. I don't get you either. But like, you don't have to get someone to support them. You don't have to get someone to realize that the experience that they're like facing is difficult for no reason, and they're facing irrational prejudice, and that they should have access to healthcare. But all these things, it just doesn't matter whether I understand non-binary people or trans men or cis men at all. All that matters is I want them to have access to healthcare, and I want to be their friends because I like people, even if I don't get them. So, yeah.